Hey, everybody, and welcome to an episode of Frank About Health. Today's date is June 12th, 2025. It is what I call my lessons learned show. It would be like a season recap. Each each season is about 12 episodes. Last Thursday was the 10th of the current block of 12. So I'm going to do what I can to recap some of the highlights of the last 10 episodes, including the guests, quotes that were said, the key issue, lessons learned during the show. Because if you all remember, I was on a 4 month hiatus prior to doing the last season of Frank About Health. And that was due to a lot of issues that I was faced with, including grief, watching some challenges going on within my family, as well as also watching the devolving of some of the aspects of my business model that I had created when I relaunched Frank About Health in 2021. However, part of the lessons learned while doing the 10 episodes that have just passed by is how to pivot, how to reposition, how to come back stronger, and how to make even my audience and my listeners who've been loyal to me since 2021 to see that Frank About Health was back and stronger. And when the next season begins in a couple weeks, it'll be even stronger than it is today. That all being said, I want to first issue my disclaimer, as I do on every episode. Each episode talks about issues that could be considered controversial in nature. They are not the views of TalkRadio.nyc or of Frank About Health, but rather they are views of the guest in question, or in Dr. Marshall Runji's case, the book in question. And simultaneously, as we also learned from other guests that we had on the show, there are some points of view that are only good for specific listeners, and yet because of a lot of our society's views, the way they've become fragmented recently, that can create a bias, and therefore all I do now is say if this is not something that you can handle, then feel free to move on to another show. I'm just doing what I can to be frank, transparent, open, and honest about the healthcare issues that are affecting all of us, especially when we're also in a state of disruption, which is what the last 10 episodes have mainly focused on. But as you learned probably from the last episode, if you had stayed tuned, it's also an opportunity for us to really get hold of our healthcare. So that's the beginning of this particular show, my summary of what this particular show is about. You see that I don't have a guest today. I guess I could say that clips of people that have been on the show, as well as quotes that I read from my transcripts and other kinds of things that I will show during my commercial break, will be highlights of who was on the show, as well as what topics were discussed. I think that all being said, again, if you are watching on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, or Twitch, feel free to ask any live questions about what I'm talking about. If you had seen the show, if you didn't have a chance to ask the questions at that time, feel free now. I will be able to help answer them in real time. I think I would like to first break out that of the 10 shows, the first four were kind of a slow rebuild after my 4 month hiatus. The second set of four was a 4 episode miniseries of the great healthcare disruption, including a book campaign. And then the last two um, was basically an individual named Deepak Sani, who was referred by Linda Marsanico from the A Train to Sedona. And he proved to be an interesting ally from Canada who really looks at how we as individuals, once our healthcare has been disrupted, we definitely learn to take ownership and actually create a model of change to continue to live with to maximize your quality of life. And then we ended the season discussing about how once you have mastered your ecosystem and your business model for keeping your healthcare in check, the entrepreneur in you can come out in certain instances. I know it has come out for me. So that's basically what we're going to talk about in the next hour. I will start by saying episode one, which aired on April 3rd, 2025, was a very unique show. It was our conscious consultant, Sam Leibowitz, who I had interview me. so that we could welcome me back into the fold after being away for 4 months. And the name of the episode was The Conscious Consultant Explores Frank About Health. And I dubbed it during that episode as 3.0 because I'd already launched the show twice on two different milestone occasions. But this one was kind of a milestone because it was a rebirth, it was a rebuilding, it was a repositioning of how I would have targeted shows that would be more focused on how we can get to maintaining our quality of life, be more preventative, and at the same time deal with crises as they occur. One of the quotes that I have, actually from Sam himself during that show, was when we're willing to be vulnerable, we give others permission to do the same. I would love to have shown you the clip, but I'm not as technologically advanced to be able to do that at this point. I think if you want to see that quote or even other aspects that of that interview that Sam and I had, by all means, just go onto the YouTube channel, look for that episode, and enjoy. Simultaneously, some of the key lessons learned during that episode include that when dealing with challenges, as I was dealing with the loss of my dear friend Retha Gray, also watching my caregiving attempts go south due to our current administration, as well as what had happened with my cousin being placed in a nursing facility, we had learned how to gain emotional resilience. And I think I had said, or maybe it was just discussed between Sam and I, emotional resilience is essential when navigating grief, caregiving, and professional transitions. Resilience is the key lesson there. You have to maintain resiliency. If you look at a situation that falls apart in front of you and you just basically give up, it's not where it basically is letting yourself become defeated. The focus is to keep on keeping on, if you've heard it phrased that way. But at the same time, most people can't do that if they're not informed correctly. And that's why I was also stating during the show that the reason for coming back was to help remove the cobwebs from a lot of people's minds, because there's a lot of misinformation in traditional media today, especially about all of the healthcare changes that have happened in our country since January. I don't need to explain why, but I just want to say that Frank About Health is the place where you're going to get the truth as much as possible, because I'm not an expert, I'm not an MD. I just basically am being an advocate and providing direction and resources. I also mentioned during that episode that speaking one's truth in healthcare advocacy builds authenticity and trust. And media platforms can amplify messages of healing and reform when they are used intentionally. And that is exactly why I brought Frank About Health to TalkRadio.nyc first in 2016 to be open and transparent about epilepsy, in 2021 to uncover the cobwebs of COVID and then branch out into every other illness that was affecting us all during that time. And then, of course, coming back while we are dealing with healthcare disruptions, both socially and technologically, that need to be managed, understood, and kept in sync with your own knowledge base while working with your PCP and other medical providers. I thought that show was a very good one. It made me feel welcomed back to the family. And immediately, the very next week, I brought in my co-host, Phyllis Quinlan, for the second episode. The episode that we did was called Healthcare Disruption, Fact or Fiction, on April 10th, 2025. And her quote was, um, actually, it was all we opened the show showing the tribute to Betty White with Retha Gray and her chugging the wine together and saying we're going to live forever. And we were reminiscing about Retha as well as the time we did the tribute episode on Frank About Health when Betty White had passed 2 years earlier. And she said when she was completely shocked and could have never imagined Retha's passing the way that it happened, that it has been quite a life lesson to watch these two women be advocates in their own right. And at the same time, all of a sudden, whether they had moved on or transitioned, they were still with us. It was a way of affirming to us that our resiliency and our ability to deal with challenges in our health are sometimes reflected in their their nuggets of wisdom that they passed on prior to their death. The insights that even during the show, I felt Retha giving me insights into what to say about her, which I had been spending most of February doing, especially when I went out to LA for her memorial service. Overall, that was a way of Phyllis and I reconnecting and really discussing about the upcoming appearance of Dr. Marshall Runge, who was going to be releasing a book in May called The Great Healthcare Disruption. But we're already seeing the disruptions in our local area here in New York City. She being a executive coach and a nurse in the New York City healthcare system, but simultaneously me doing this show, how could I just come back to Frank About Health in 2025 and talk about cancer, leukemia, or anything, knowing that a lot of that information has been removed from the internet, knowing that certain sites, certain local resources are still available to get transparency out to patients, but it's no longer the fluid, dynamic communication that we were all experiencing, especially during COVID, and especially when we had a different administration that was as transparent as they could be about any illnesses that were going on. It was just a total 180. And I think showing us that each of us have to be as almost like in our own medical program, our own medical school, to get as much information necessary so that we know how to deal with whatever's going on in our family through our friends and other especially if you're a caregiver, other groups. Now, Phyllis, if you all remember when I first met her, she was part of the Share the Care organization, which I believe she still is. And she was very much into caregiving through our 2 hour caregiving panel that we had. Retha was part of that, I remember. But she was definitely looking at the Frank About Health audience as the caregiving that she could provide to say, okay, Frank, Phyllis, do you think that is fact or is that fiction? That episode was more of a transition episode, getting us ready for the rest of the season to follow. I think we learned that AI was definitely going to be very pivotal in 2025, particularly ChatGPT and Perplexity, which are very healthcare specific. ChatGPT has been very helpful to me in being able to be resilient in watching all of the changes that have gone on in both our society as well as in my father's case and my cousin's case and among my own healthcare needs. But I would say that that proved to be a very successful episode. I think we had about 50 viewers on YouTube alone. And by the way, Phyllis, happy birthday. I know today is your birthday. And if you're watching, I wish you were here with me now, but we'll definitely have a reconvene in July when we try to bring back Marshall Runge to see how his book has been doing. Well, I think I'm ready for my first break. In the last 13 minutes, yep, I have just covered the first two episodes of this season. As I said, April 3rd, I came back to Frank About Health, and it was called The Conscious Consultant Explores Frank About Health. And on April 10th, me and Phyllis Quinlan got together and we talked about healthcare disruption and trying to discuss, in addition to pay tribute to Aretha Gray's passing, whether healthcare disruption is fact or fiction. And we concluded it's predominantly fact. And then we were using the later episodes of Frank About Health to disclose the facts, interpret the facts, and helpfully answer any of your questions out there. Okay, when we come back, we will talk about episodes 3 and 4 right here on TalkRadio.nyc on our socials, and we'll be back in a few. See you soon.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant, and on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour Awakening Humanity, Thursdays 12 noon on TalkRadio.nyc.
Are you a high-achieving, growth-oriented leader? Are you interested in developing your authentic leadership while creating a healthy, inclusive workplace? Hi, I'm Dr. Mira Brancu, host of The Hard Skills, on TalkRadio.nyc at 5 p.m. Eastern on Tuesdays, where we discuss how leaders develop the hard skills needed to make a greater impact. We interview experts, have live coaching, and tackle these challenges. Listen to The Hard Skills on Tuesday at 5 p.m. Eastern on TalkRadio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. I just tried to show you during the first commercial break both Sam Leibowitz and Phyllis Quinlan's LinkedIn pages so that you can know who your conscious consultant is. Again, he's the executive producer of TalkRadio.nyc, and he has his show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Everyday Awakenings, every Thursday at 12 noon right here on the network. Simultaneously, Phyllis Quinlan continues to be a very dear friend and healthcare advocate in her own right. And I promise she will be on Frank About Health in the near future as we continue to pay tribute to a lot of the core guests that we've been talking about, the hard hitting facts that are affecting us all. Episode 3, which happened on April 17th, 2025, was called Building Resilience, and the guest was Siobhan Laurice, a referral from Sam Leibowitz. Siobhan Laurice was looking at alternative healthcare treatments for a lot of people in the Virginia, Maryland area. Now, a lot of people, if you remember in the early part of the fall, in the early part of the year, were being eliminated from their jobs, especially within the federal government, leading to a lot of trauma reactions, leading to a lot of issues related to depression, anxiety, and other kinds of stress triggers that were just not doing well. So she started to talk about her practice that was also using alternative treatments with cannabis, as well as some other herbal treatments that she had discussed during the show. One of her quotes is that I'm here to help build community because it's going to be the key that gets us through all of this. The ongoing uncertainty that was starting out the year, and then, of course, even since that airing, has gotten a little bit more worse. But at least I can say that that is a local area. Depending on where you're living, it could be more extreme than is happening right here in New York, for example. I mean, we've got some guardrails in New York, but I don't know. I've seen a lot of limitations on my side as well, but nothing to the extreme like we've all been seeing recently in the media in California, but that is not a health related topic. Um, Siobhan Laurice basically was very instrumental to my mother, who was watching this show, and she was already seeing that she could probably help her with her sleeplessness, as well as other kinds of trauma reactions my mother had been having. Overall, I tried to pair them together because that was one of the things that Siobhan was able to indicate, that she is able to work with anyone that is a direct referral from talkradio.nyc or is at the same time dealing with a lot of these stressful reactions after job displacement and things like that. I'm not sure that ever happened, but, or rather, I'm not sure they ever got in touch. But I will say that there were a lot of lessons learned in that particular episode. And I want to read from the notes I have here because, it would be more transparent than I could use from my own recall. Um, the things that Siobhan mentioned during that episode is that rather than labeling, which also influences toxic dynamics in the workplace, Siobhan encourages turning into one's own gut instinct to determine which relationships to nurture and which to limit, offering practical insights for those navigating emotional fragmentation in an era of collective uncertainty. When people are leaving a government job, one can already speak about the culture in that job. But to have it all of a sudden displaced for no reason at all, no explainable one that makes any sense, You already have the trauma of losing the job, and you have the trauma of no explanation behind losing the job. And then you have a trust difficulty, a reality testing problem when being able to face your family, your friends, any of your former coworkers or even other colleagues that you would want to network and looking for work. It actually prevents people from being motivated to finding another job. Most people would have been better off finding the other job if they knew the chopping block was coming, or if they felt it coming and they had a matter of, I don't know, 30 days or whatever to be able to make a transition. She did mention in that episode that there was a friend of hers that managed to get another job and leave on his own, which was a good thing. Or maybe he took the severance and then got the other job. I don't totally recall. But it was a lesson about taking agency over your own needs to make a transition, even if it's not what you wanted to do on default, even if it was not the main focus of your time, but knowing that you were pretty much advocating for your life, especially with all the uncertainty going on at that point with Mr. Musk as well. That all being said, overall, Shravan does have a good practice out there showing how building resiliency is critical and is important. And I will show you in the next commercial break her website so that if you're interested in contacting her, so that you can just get a consult and discuss with Shravan as to if she can help you with your emotional and trigger needs. I would highly recommend her as I did to my mother. Ah, episode 4 was a very special episode. It was April 24th, 2025, and it was about commemorating Brooklyn Technical High School with my alumni friend from the class of '84, David Yang. David Yang would come back and prove to be very instrumental in having interviews with me and Marshall Runji, as well as also a guest of his that he brought on the episode that aired last week. More about that later. What I found interesting about David is that he and I, to begin with, were already participating in a Brooklyn Tech STEM Future World Vision Advisory Board committee meeting at the same week that I was about to go to my 40th homecoming. But I wasn't able to attend it because I was actually going to be attending a trip for a fundraising, a book fundraising campaign that was effectually added to Frank About Health during the following 4 weeks after that, and that was with Dr. Marshall Runji. Now, the thing is, though, that while business took over, I wanted to pay tribute to the legacy because the lesson learned for me in doing that show and by bringing David into it, being that he was from Brooklyn Tech, being that he's also in the healthcare space, that we were able to also determine just by our discussion that I wasn't motivated to be in healthcare when I went to that high school. I was motivated to just be in business. I loved mathematics, I loved marketing, I loved psychology, but I just knew that they were tools that I was building. And I went to the college of my dreams. But I still did not really know what I wanted to do. I always found myself falling into what I was meant to do, but I couldn't help but feel challenged all the time where, for example, when I left my college, I went to work for a bank. I hated that, but I became a DJ. And after that, I ended up in the music industry. And then after that, when the music industry imploded, my entrepreneurial vision took hold along with healthcare crises. And I decided, well, you know what? Brooklyn Tech did provide me with the skill sets to be resilient and at the same time to be entrepreneurial and end up doing what I guess I always knew I was meant to do, which was to advocate or promote or market healthcare programs and opportunities. My very first epileptic seizure was at Brooklyn Technical High School in March of 20, I almost said 20, 1984. And I always wondered then, okay, I am living with something that has a stigma attached to it. But at this point now, I wear it as a badge of honor. Again, I give Brooklyn Tech for being not only the initial problem case that made me have to find a way to live through my life with epilepsy, but it also became my pathway to build a solution. And one of the solutions you're listening to right now, it's Frank About Health. It has afforded me in over 4 years' time to be a healthcare advocate as well as to do what I can to continue to advocate for other people with other types of illnesses that at least I have become very informed about and I have developed the key resources. So I would have to say that tribute episode was also paying tribute to Frank About Health and paying tribute to how I've evolved over the last 40 years. And I am glad we did that show together. So in the last, I would have to say almost half hour, we've talked about key lessons from those first four episodes. Again, the one with me and Sam was about rebirth from challenges, which I did have a preview, by the way, as being a guest on Linda Marsanico's A Train to Sedona, where we talked about that a little bit. And then at the same time, being back with Phyllis, dealing with the grief over Retha Gray's passing and understanding that we're living in a state of chaos with healthcare disruptions, but we're not sure if it's true or false, realizing that it's basically true. And then in episode three that I came back, um, with Siobhan Laurice, she gave me the understanding that resiliency is a key tool that we all need to have. And then by paying the tribute to Brooklyn Tech, I'm looking that not only do you have resiliency, but you also have reflection. And it is reflecting on where things began for you that bring you to where you are today. Everything does come back full circle. And I guess I could honestly say that I give credit to Sam, Phyllis, Siobhan, and David for helping me continue to rebuild the trajectory post my 4 month hiatus. Okay, that's already the first half hour gone. I'm going to now take another break and we will be back in a few. See you soon.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on TalkRadio.nyc, I host the program Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on TalkRadio.nyc.
Hi, I'm Linda Marsanico. The A Train to Sedona is a memoir about my journey to love and compassion. It's also the name of my new broadcast on Wednesdays at 12 noon. When we are spiritual, we embrace possibilities and ideas, which strengthen our mind, body, spirit, health, and wisdom. On the A Train to Sedona broadcast, I plan to interview guests who embrace these expansive practices. Join us on Wednesdays at 12 noon on Talk Radio New York City.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. Sorry about all those technical challenges during the commercial break. I wanted to get to Siobhan Laurice's page and also at the same time prevent freezing out. I just wanted you to all see that she is ready to book a consultation with all of you at any point in time if you should seek any information. If you saw while browsing through the site, not only does she deal with PTSD issues and stress issues, anxiety and depression, she does yoga therapy and she does psychedelic therapy. I know cannabis is one of the tools, but she was also dealing with some other, um, I wouldn't call it drug, some other herb that was able to also provide some healing, neurological healing, especially if some of those triggers are just recurring, regardless of what your circumstances are at that point. Um, I think now would be the time to really, especially in this third segment, emphasize the importance of healthcare disruption. The Great Healthcare Disruption was released on May 6th, 2025, originally on episode 5 of the season that aired May 1st, 2025. I brought back Phyllis Quinlan, and Marshall, Phyllis, and I had a conversation with him about his upcoming book. And I just thought it was perfect that someone with her, Phyllis's experience, a medical nurse, executive coach, someone who's been dealing in EMT and trauma therapy, trauma conditions, and elderly, and vaccines, and all those kinds of issues, could discuss all the nuts and bolts of what was in that book, what was about to be released. Overall, I remember from the show that Phyllis was able to do what she could to provoke him into giving more insights that he himself had forgotten to write about in the book. But I was glad that he was able to share with the Frank About Health listeners some of those key issues because I guess, if anything, he's going to be in a position to write an appendix or possibly even an addendum to the book because he wrote it when we were still under healthier times about a year ago. And then now, even more than ever, we need more transparency. So I believe he is going to be doing that. I just don't know any hard information as to when or if or how. But I can say that Forbes has already picked up on his book and they're going to do a tribute to him next week here in New York City. And I just think that's a high honor. I did learn from Marshall that you viewers out there have been watching the 4 episodes, including episode 5 with Marshall and Phyllis, and have actually participated in viewing the book on Amazon.com and possibly even making a purchase. I just don't know if, in fact, that has been done, but I can honestly say I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from Marshall about the Frank About Health audience really taking seriously the lessons learned that he not only covered on the show with Phyllis, but also on the 3 subsequent shows, which I will discuss later on. A quote that came from Marshall during that show is something that we should all be saying to ourselves. Disruption begins by acknowledging what no longer serves us. All right, now simultaneously, he meant it as disruption in society begins by acknowledging what no longer serves the people. Bottom line, disruption is when there is a break in consistent treatment and coping that we are dealing with. And when there's constant uncertainty and fragmentation and misinformation, we are always in chaos. So, what is now the constant is disruption. And therefore, in order to not let it affect our mental health, embrace it and do what you can to figure out your own tailor made individual strategies to be resilient during the challenges that are faced and to seek out the right information, treatments, technologies, and solutions to help continue whatever it is that you're dealing with, whether it's your own health condition, whether you're doing caregiving for someone else, or whether you're just doing a podcast like am doing by giving all of you guys a lessons learned episode. I'm just trying to repeat some of the key facts from the show. Again, I do advise if any of you want to see the show in its entirety, please go again into our YouTube channel and look under Frank About Health, especially for the Marshall Runji episodes, if you want to buy the book, as well as if you want to be able to understand what some of the key points of disruption that Marshall mentions. He also did say, or rather, what was covered in that episode with Phyllis, are some of the key points in the book. He mentioned to say the U.S. healthcare system must be reimagined, especially post pandemic. Leadership must address inequities and systemic inefficiencies. There was a conversation between Phyllis and Marshall about how the healthcare professionals out there, the doctors and nurses, are either burnt out or aging out. And as such, we have to get the new school or the new doctors of the future, probably by even tapping into them when they're still in middle school or high school. That I thought was a big takeaway because, as I said earlier, when I did the tribute to Brooklyn Tech episode, what I learned from that show is that my interest in healthcare probably began back there. I was just not conscious of it as I eventually became. Now, obviously, by having someone like Marshall Runji continue to advocate for healthcare in the younger audience, the younger generations, and get them excited about that in those younger ages, who can say with the new technologies like in AI and genetic testing like in CRISPR that you're going to have solutions and cures for always considered fatal illnesses, probably age or increase the age limit to over 100 plus. I know that one of the guests that we'll talk about later, Deepak Sani, said that that was his intention to be a centenarian. So the thing is that in order to reach those goals, you need to look from within and be able to understand that if healthcare is something you want to fight for and advocate for, or even be a professional in, you have to also compartmentalize between the profession and caregiving aspects of healthcare versus the business of healthcare. And that's one thing that Phyllis had mentioned during the show that we did in episode 5. There is a lot of focus and a lot of resilience and a lot of uh, education you need to learn on a daily basis in order to really pursue the healthcare field with as much professionalism as possible. Of course, if it's something that you really cannot withstand based on your own personal experiences or whatever, then maybe it's not the position for you. But like I can honestly say, I don't know if I'll ever be a doctor. That's not my plan. But I will continue to be an advocate, even as I pursue other business goals or other professional goals going forward. So, episode 5 on May 1st was the preamble to what would continue on beyond that point. The other shows that happened afterwards, episode 6 of the season on May 8th, was my first ever Frank About Health webinar, where I spent a AI generated PowerPoint with the QR code for that book, discussing the book in detail, hopefully giving you guys a lesson in that book, The Great Healthcare Disruption, so that you can understand that if I was going about it with you guys, that's the way you should be going about it with yourself and your family, so that you get your information up front and ready. And when you're ready to see your doctors or your specialists, you can discuss with them these issues rather than be dependent on them giving you possibly misinformation or even information that doesn't fit your case. You never really know. You have to get on a collegiate level. So I was trying to educate all of you out there by using this webinar format. And again, like from what I heard, it was a success. Then after that, I was anticipating in episode 7 on May 15th, 2025, to bring David Yang back and to have a conversation with Marshall Runge about the book. It was considered a live Q&A panel, and lo and behold, he was disrupted. His own medical school and as well as his hospital system was going through budget cuts. And I don't need to explain where they were coming from, but as a result, he could not appear on the show. So we were watching, excuse me, we were watching Disruption in Action. And both David and I were able to handle the conversation with the promise that he was going to return the following week, which he did. In episode 8, which was on May 22nd, 2025, we basically, Marshall, David, and I talked again about the very questions in the book that both David and I were exploring, but we added the whole neurological invention of CRISPR, which David Yang's company was very much involved in developing a few years ago, and David Yang was involved in that. So that was, I thought, the bonus of not having Marshall in the previous show, but at the same time, it also tried to become the beginning of looking at healthcare disruption as an opportunity. Now, the whole thing with CRISPR technology is that it's gene editing technology, which allows you to do the whole process of finding cures for things either in utero or possibly do what you can to reprogram genes that are markers for diseases like diabetes or cancer or whatever. I know CRISPR from my experience with epilepsy and understanding of how they would use CRISPR technology to help minimize seizures or even do what they can to prevent strokes or other kinds of genetic ailments. But it's still expanding as we speak. We just are looking at next generation therapies And I think that that particular episode highlighted that, even though it's also featured in the book. Um, a quote that came from that episode is decentralized care must balance convenience, access, and equity. I could see both Marshall and David saying that, but more than likely that was a quote from the book. David shares insights from his career in medical technology, emphasizes the transformative role that mRNA played during COVID-19, and Dr. Marshall Runji highlighted the benefits and concerns surrounding the decentralization of care, such as CVS administering vaccines and convenience, access, and equity intersecting in today's healthcare system. Now, for those of you out there listening to the news and hearing about how the CDC has been dismantled in the last week, the entire vaccine committee, all I can say is when you get information like that from Dr. Marshall Runji, that means you need to make best friends with your CVS, or I use Dwayne Reed or Walgreens, but you need to make friends with your pharmacist to keep up to date with your vaccines. I'm being totally honest about this, have had a lingering cough for the past 2 weeks. First, I thought it was allergies. Then I thought it was the flu. I'm wondering if it was COVID, but I'm fully vaccinated. Like I've had 9 shots over the last 4 years. So I called Dwayne Reed. They said, no, you're okay. Just get ready for my COVID vaccine and flu shot in the fall. But the point is, the lingering cough, you need to be mindful of why is it lingering and what concerns do I need to be mindful of, because we're not getting our information as frequently and open anymore. It's just radio silence unless you go out searching and asking. Wow. So episodes 5, 6, 7, and 8. Sorry, I consider that the Great Healthcare Disruption Campaign. We're about to take our, I think it's our third and final break, and I'm going to show you the QR code. So if you are interested in getting the Great Healthcare Disruption, please feel free. It links you straight into Amazon, and I believe if you're a Prime member, you will have it in your inbox by tomorrow, meaning your mailbox. And you might even get a discount. I know definitely free shipping. All right, stay tuned. We'll be back in a few.
Were you an essential worker during the pandemic? If you needed to learn stages of epilepsy, did you depend on advocates? Did you use new innovations to cope with mental and neurological issues? Maintaining high quality of life and keeping good mental health are what we all strive for. I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each week top healthcare influencers, professionals, and innovators answer these questions and more. Stay tuned on Thursdays at 5 p.m. on TalkRadio.nyc, and I will continue to be frank about health with all of you.
Ready to serve up success with a splash? Hi, I'm Bruce Kramer, a.k.a. the Corporate Cockroach.
I'm the Renaissance woman, Angie Snowball.
And I'm your strategy doctor, Dr. Navtej Desange, inviting you to serving up success with a splash.
Join us as we shake things up with real talk and real strategies centered around awareness, action, and accountability.
And yes, there really is a cocktail involved. Please join us and sip your way to success.
Serving up success with a splash, where wisdom meets happy hours. Cheers!
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 You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Hey, everybody, and welcome back. Episode 9 of the season on May 29th, 2025 was, it was called, let me get the right title here. It was with, Time to Thrive, TIIME, with Deepak Sani. It was Aging Strong and Living Long. Again, this was a very good contact and a referral from Linda Marsanico from the A Train to Sedona. And he had claimed on her show, as well as on Frank About Health, and on his own podcast, the Deepak Sani Show on YouTube, that he wanted to be a centenarian after living a long life with obesity and doing what he can to manage the comorbidities that came with that obesity. When the pivot point happened, when he could not bend down to pick up his young child, he did everything that he could to lose the weight, but he went the natural route. He did not use the GLP-1 drugs. He was mainly focused on eating right and exercising and walking and running and aerobics and all other methodologies that he used. I think he said that it took him, oh wow, I don't know if it took him 10 years or if it took him 10 months, but all I could say is that he basically gave the quote on that episode that aging doesn't mean that life is meant to be declined or that your life is declining. It's an evolution. But the only way that you can make that happen is by being as healthy as possible, living your best quality of life so that using his methodology, the time methodology, and he broke it down during the show. You got to forgive me if I don't have the actual acronyms offhand. But then that's reason to watch the show after you finish watching this one. Uh, Basically, he's able to take on clients just like the way Shervan is and work with individuals out there that are suffering, whether it's from morbid obesity or some other health ailments that they want to learn to live with, and use the time methodology so that it decreases your developmental age by the way the vitality in you has been increased after you have made all the necessary changes with your health. That I think was his way of saying that by if your goal is to be a centenarian or to live 100 plus, like as high as 125, let's say, then you have to use the right living well methodology that he is able to at least educate you and help you participate in. I highly recommend that he is someone you contact, especially if you are living with morbid obesity or have other kinds of ailments that you want to learn to either live with or try to resolve in as best of way possible. He also did point out that while in Canada, he's noticing the disruption that is going on in the United States, but mainly on the side of the tariffs. He's not seeing it as readily as we are. I can tell you from personal experience that they have a very robust healthcare system. They actually manufacture a lot of their own pharmaceutical drugs and they sell them at deep discounts without insurance. But now I would think that's more on the local level rather than the way it would be mailed into the United States. Like I was receiving my epilepsy medications from Vancouver at one point. Again, tariffs, VAT costs, shipping costs, and not to mention that everything would be inflated. So I can't speak for that for the US market, but I can say they also have a socialized healthcare system. So a lot of the stuff still maintains coverage from their government. The thing is though that just like in the United States, whether you're in Canada or the United States, you have to really own your health care. And if your goal is to live long or age well, and also diminish the negative impact that your obesity or other ailment is creating, you have to develop a methodology for yourself that no one else is following. Not even your doctors would prescribe. That methodology for him is the time methodology, TIIME, but he could educate you on that or something that would work best for you. Let me see if there were any other quotes from that show. He mentioned the three lessons learned that I have here from that show are longevity isn't about lifespan, it's about health span. That's something I remember him saying on the show. The time method integrates mindset, sleep, metabolic health, all for optimal aging. And personalized health strategies are more effective than the one size fits all plan. And another quote from him, aging. Oh well, I already read it. Aging doesn't have to mean decline, it can mean evolution. Overall, Deepak Sani, I invited to join me and Phyllis and possibly even David Yang in July when I bring back Marshall Runji to do a recap on his book. By that point, it would have already been out on the street for 2 months, and we'll get to see the impact it's created with his audience. I could just say that I'm thankful to the audience out there that had been watching the 4 episodes that I had done on the great healthcare disruption. This way, we were able to do our 2 cents to help promote and advocate for that book because that's a manual that I use to this day for everything that I'm dealing with my father, my cousin, and not to mention my own healthcare. Finally, the 10th episode, which aired last week, was on June 5th, 2025, with Mark Filerman and David Yang. Mark Filerman and David Yang went to Brooklyn Tech together, class of 84. Mark Filerman, I felt I had a lot in common with him because he has a 95-year-old grandmother living here, at least at home, but she has Alzheimer's disease, while I have a 65 going on 66-year-old cousin living in a nursing home with Alzheimer's disease. And I think her longevity is tantamount to her being in a comfort zone, which is her home. I'm not very optimistic about the longevity of my cousin, and I'm sad to say. But the thing is that to have longevity, not only like what Deepak Sani said, not only living your best life with getting rid of what ails you, when you're an Alzheimer's patient, you're in more dependency with your outer environment, which is your caregivers, as well as your nurses, doctors, whoever it is that's taking care of you. When you're in a nursing home, one thing I could say is that neglect is almost guaranteed, and that's tragic. But thankfully, her son continues to this day, even unpaid, to be her caregiver by visiting her daily and doing the work that the others are neglecting in doing. So I would have to say the lesson learned there, especially with what Mark Filerman had said about his mother, is that family is everything, and you need to be respectful of each other as best as possible, even when you don't know what you're talking about, even when there's confusion and misinformation. I could say personally, ChatGPT has been able to help me bridge the communication gap between me and my parents, for example. But that's not a foolproof guarantee. You always do need the human connection, the human translator behind it. Because if you just believe in what your computer or your handheld pocket device tells you, you're actually isolating yourself. It's not, it's actually defeating the purpose. It's becoming an addiction. You know, Mark Filerman talked about the value of creating an ecosystem with David Yang. David Yang was also mirroring that based on how his companies have allowed him to develop an ecosystem methodology in dealing with the coworkers that have been there. I remember he was saying that at one of his companies, there was, I don't know if it was a nurse or a researcher that was working with him on a protocol to understand a certain innovation that was being created. But because of her 30 years of rote experience in looking at the due diligence behind that particular invention, she was not looking at the new way of understanding how to use the ecosystem to your advantage. And he was able to clarify that to her. She felt like the light bulb had gone off, and now there was this active engagement and collaboration going on in the company. Where I think the lesson learned there is that when dealing with ecosystems, whether it's a workplace or if it's your own venture, collaboration is key. Otherwise, the idea will just eventually stagnate and die. Excuse me. I found that to be a nice wrap up of the season because I was able to see that that's exactly what I've been doing over the last 4 years on Frank About Health. I started talking about Frank About Health, in all the episodes that I've done. And then I branched out by working with Hilton Hotels and started to work on a documentary. Yes, the documentary will eventually come out. At the same time, I've also learned in the last 6 months after Retha's passing that AI is very informative and inspirational, and I'm starting to learn all the necessary AI techniques that I could do to make Frank About Health more seamless in the future. And at the same thing, at the same time, it just tells me that what I deliver on Frank About Health is basically the finished product of everything I'm doing in my daily life versus the other way around, which is the way I think I was operating, especially when we were all operating under Zoom through COVID. I see we are 2 minutes to ending. Now, I would like to say that it has been my pleasure to host these 10 episodes of Frank About Health over the last season. I'm going to, conclude the campaign of disruption with Marshall Runji at some point in July. Like I said earlier, I'm going to also do what I can to release the documentary on a special YouTube launch. More information on that to follow. Next week, I will be hosting for my season finale a young man who has been very instrumental with me these past 6 months in helping me revive my company vision, Healthy Media, which had to be pivoted as a result of all the changes that occurred during the hiatus, including our administration. I was in a constant state of disruption. That's why the last 10 episodes of Frank About Health have been therapeutic for me to not only show you what I've learned, but also hopefully what you can all learn as well. Um, at 6 o'clock, right here on TalkRadio.nyc, Success with a Splash will be airing. And again, after next week's episode of the Conscious Consultant Hour, I will do what I can to present you with that season finale episode of Frank About Health, which will give you insight into the next chapter that I take when I revamp the next season of Frank About Health the week after. All right, everybody. I hope you learned your lessons right here on Frank About Health during the past hour. And I will see you next week. Take care.